Do you know what goes on behind the scenes to monitor players? Hello, I'm Kristian Weaver and welcome to this episode with Liam Hayes. Today we're going to be talking about the secret world, or maybe not so secret world, of monitoring players. So Liam, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me on, Kristian. I'm Liam Hayes. I'm the founder of TrainMyAthlete, and that is a data analytics platform. And we analyse predominantly three types of data from GPS that the players are wearing. We monitor their training loads, both remotely and at the training ground. And then we monitor their wellness. And what we do is through some complex and some rather straightforward algorithms, we give the visualization so the sports scientists, so the backroom teams can understand what's going on with all of that data. We're represented through the Football League predominantly, and we launched in November of last year now. So we're gaining some nice traction, and it's been a wonderful journey so far.
Great stuff. So often as sports therapists, we get overwhelmed by the amount of analytical data and the amount of information that we're getting. So how are medical staff monitoring players?
Well, I think it depends what standard that you're at, and there's some pretty easy monitoring that you can apply from the very lowest levels if you don't have the budget. But if I start with the elite, generally speaking, you've got your GPS statistics. So from your GPS pods, those clubs will be wanting to know how fast people are going, what type of distances they're covering. This is both in training and the game, and particular emphasis we're finding on high speed running. So how many of those, some people call them power plays or really high intense speeds are happening during a game. So I would say that's been emerging over the last decade or so, and there's some really good GPS units that are on show at the moment that do some awesome things, and most of the calculations are done internally through those GPS units. So you can get a lot out of that data, and I mean exclusively if you're a professional sports team, you're very likely to have invested now in GPS. It's just, rather than a luxury, it's just become an essential component. I guess it's a little bit of big brother for the players, I guess, but there really is no hiding ground. And I think there's the performance element of that, but also there's the actual protecting the health of that athlete. So that's quite key. But it's certainly not standalone, and it certainly shouldn't be used standalone. The wellness side of things, with our platform in terms of the usage, we're finding that is something that's really key to the top clubs, and that really can be broken down into how well did they sleep, could be by hours or quality, what their mood and their energy levels are like, if they've got any body soreness. And generally speaking, through our platform, for example, that's like a sliding scale that the players will answer. So they'll have a spectrum of colours from green to red, and they'll be able to slide depending on how they feel. And then you might have a body chart that you can select if they're feeling some DOMs after training, or if they're feeling tired, etc. So that's critical. And then there's the final component of that we're seeing is just what they refer to as like an acute chronic load. So the training loads that are happening every day, and they can be they're quite a straightforward thing that anyone can do at home. If you're looking after your kind of Saturday league football team, essentially that can be applied by how many minutes that player has played. Then asking them a sessional RPE, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard did they found that match or session. And then if you times that together, you get a set number, which is your arbitrary units for that day. And then you add those up over the course of 7 days. And then depending on how you want to do it, you divide it against the last 28 days as a rolling average. That tends to be the most common, but some people go for 3 weeks over 4 weeks. And then that figure gives you a number, normally between 1 and 3. And depending on what literature you read, generally speaking, there's a sweet spot. It might vary for different people. Some people might be used to being a little bit higher on the scale. But what it does give you a good indication is to just the basics of, compared to what they did last week, has there been a sudden spike in intensity? And whilst it's not a guarantee that they'll get injured from that, it just gives a sports therapist, physiotherapist, sports scientist, whoever's looking at the data, just an idea that they might be predisposed to risk. And particularly if they're sessional RPE, if they're saying they're 9s and 10s after training, then it might be a good opportunity to look at recovery options, as well as trying to reduce their training load, maybe depending on what start of the season. Generally in pre-season, you're going to naturally get a bit of spike. But I would say to anyone at the lowest form of the game with regards to struggling with budgets, just get them doing an acute chronic load through sessional RPE and the minutes that they've played. For those keeners looking at the research, the last 6 months, there's been a bit of criticism about acute chronic load and how it's not this gold standard that we all go to. However, it doesn't change the fact that when you're on limited resources, I just think it's wonderful. I was a physiotherapist back before I started this, and I was looking after a women's football team, and it just allowed me to make decisions. And then just the final point on all of that data, what you're looking for is just changes to the players' averages and means, big shifts in what they're used to. And if you're really keen and you've got an Excel spreadsheet handy, there are 2 scores that I'd recommend that you calculate. One is a Z calculation. Off the top of my head, I think the equation is you set a baseline of what you expect. So let's just take sleep, for example. If you expect all of your players to get 8 hours of sleep, you set your baseline, and then what do? You minus that from what their actual score is. Please look this up, guys. And then you divide it by the standard deviation. And when you get a big spike, you'll know. And then there's something called a STEN score, STEN, all capital letters. And you can take, when you have your Z score, you can apply a STEN calculation to it, which is like the Z times 2 times or plus 5.5, I can't remember off the top of my head. And that just gives a score of 1 to 10. So you can clearly see, if 10 being really good, you can just clearly see changes. If someone's sleep is dotted around 8, and then suddenly for the last week they've hit 4 hours sleep, their STEN score would go from like 9 or 10 down to 4. And suddenly that would be like, okay, there's something that we need to do. And you can apply STEM scores to any variables. So there's a couple of key nuggets there to look for. And whilst I love TrainMyAthlete and the visuals that the platform gives, sometimes an Excel spreadsheet is just as good, and it's free. So you can do those calculations. So a long-winded answer there, Kristian, but hopefully just some little bits and bobs that we use at TrainMyAthlete. And we can plot those on like radar graphs, which are really cool, to give you the visualization. So there are a few things that the clubs that we work for are doing, and that's at professional level. So anyone who can replicate that in semi-professional world would be doing quite well.
Yeah, and TrainMyAthlete is very much at the higher end of what sports teams are using at this moment in time. However, I'm the same as you. When I came from women's football, actually it was an Excel spreadsheet to start off with, looking at all those wellness scores, making sure that we tried to calculate that sort of acute work ratio, acute to chronic work ratio, so that we actually had some idea of what was happening with our players. So yeah, there are basic forms, but obviously TrainMyAthlete takes that to almost a whole new level. You did mention then about the high speed running aspect, and there have been links with that to hamstring injury. So in terms of what you see coming through your data, is there any links that you've seen between injury risks and associated data that you see?
Yeah, I think it is. It's the most significant from looking at our data predictor. So high speed running for a particular athlete, if there's been a big momentum shift from what is their baseline, their mean, whatever way you look at it, their average, we're seeing that there's a significant increase in risk of injury. So what we see after a game, what will be really important to clubs will be to see if anyone's shot up from that. So if you're a team and your back's against the wall and you're having to defend resolutely and do lots of high-speed running to try and either win the ball back or protect in your kind of low block, we tend to find that it's really important for clubs to see if they've gone well above their average. And what you'll find then is their recovery will be completely different from other squad members. And that's just because the risk of injury. So it'd be really, really important that those players get really good recovery, because if they don't get that, then what we're seeing is that link between excessive high-speed running away from the norm and injury. Not necessarily hamstrings in terms of the data that we're seeing, lower limb generally. Hamstrings are predominantly what's affected, but it just really is an awareness that you're just predisposed to an injury of some sort, and just ensuring that those players get good recovery. An acute chronic load calculation can be applied to that as well. So you can do your rolling average the last week over the last 28 days, whatever you want to do. But there absolutely is a link between high-speed running and injury of some sort.
Okay, great. And in terms of that recovery methods that you see the teams who you work with employ, is that normally a rest day, or does it change to being some more active recovery? What kind of methods do they use to try and bring those values down to ensure that players aren't getting injured?
I think they'll always... we're seeing in the higher leagues, let's just say with our data that we've got, kind of League One and up, it does tend to be more active recovery. Often I think in these situations, the day after a game is probably governed by what the manager wants. So some managers, particularly the more elite, so a lot of the Premier League clubs will come in the day after a game for some sort of active recovery. So I think that's common. And I think if you have the ability to do that, prescribing some active recovery tends to be the best way. And if you have it, focusing on those heart rate zones, so ensuring that if it is active recovery, it is recovery, and you're staying very much at conversational pace and in those green heart rate zones. But a rest day for our kind of semi-professional amateur is good as well. I think just ensuring that you're getting across messages of good hydration, potentially, arguably, a stretching routine, and maybe even just a walk around the block if they don't have work commitments. But I'd say at the more professional elite side of the game, active recovery is what we're seeing. Yeah.
And obviously, TrainMyAthlete's had quite a important part to play, considering that players haven't been able to be monitored necessarily within clubs at this moment in time. So what have you been doing with TrainMyAthlete in order to keep a tab on what players are doing and how medical staff can actually monitor what's going on outside of the club?
Well, just not to bore you guys too much, but when I first started, it was because when I was working in sport, I was just sick when they went off for off-season. I'd create these Excel spreadsheets or emails, and the spreadsheets would just be left in the changing rooms at the end, and they wouldn't really, and it'd be WhatsApp trying to track people about their weight and what they're doing. So I really just started TrainMyAthlete version 1 as a way just to put all of the plans, the nutrition plans, when they're in the off season. We've since developed the analytics platform, but that key ingredient, I mean, during COVID-19 has just been so key, because normally in a professional club, your wellness scores, I don't know if it was the same with you, Kristian, sports scientists and sports therapists like to do that face-to-face, asking the question face-to-face, how's your sleep, how's your mood, how's your energy, and then making that judgment, because the skill of that clinician is really important in knowing, actually, I think you shouldn't do too much, or I think you're okay to do quite a lot. but we can't do that, and it's not recommended to do that. And some guys are in different countries or just away with different types of equipment. So it's been quite nice, and we've seen a lot of traction from clubs using us purely because we can monitor players remotely, and all of that data gets fed back. So the easiest way it's done is through questionnaires every morning. And depending on what the club wants to do, that could be a coronavirus screening questionnaire asking about temperature, their cough, their breathing. That will trigger an alert if it meets a certain threshold, and alert the club doctor that they need to do something or need to take a conversation further. The same with the wellness. All of that is populated, and it all comes up in nice visuals in the system, color coded, so you can get a real glimpse on how people's stress levels are, how their sleep levels are, and mood, etc. And then, like when we first devised the app, all of their workout data and all of their nutrition data. And it's been really interesting taking a look at that remotely, because what we're seeing is that players can't replicate the stresses of training or a match day at home. Different resources, generally on lockdown, so if you don't have a gym at home, it's very difficult. And you talked about high-speed running earlier, and it's those that tend to not be able to be replicated. So we're seeing a lot of cardiovascular type workouts going out for long runs, which is wonderful. But if you talk about specific adaptations or replications of a game environment, then it's just a small aspect cardiovascular. And actually what medics and sports therapists now who are getting people back into training, I'm sure will have anxieties about, is trying to then get those sports specific demands back into those players, but in a way that doesn't create a huge spike in intensity like we just spoke about earlier. And I guess the only thing that helps them is with TrainMyAthlete is at least it's giving them, okay, so player X has done predominantly cardiovascular, so he's cardiovascularly quite strong. He hasn't done much sprint work or speed work, so potentially that might be a focus of some of our trainings in a safe manner. So I think that's why it's been quite key, and sometimes it's very hard to ascertain that data through an app. So we'll have manual entry, just simple manual entry. So if you've only got WhatsApp, you can ask the players what they've been doing and put it in maybe a spreadsheet. So you can maybe do a pie chart or something to find out what they've been doing. And some of the clubs have been sending players home. They've had the luxury of sending players home with GPS. So the GPS just records straight into the system, so they know exactly what type of fitness they're doing. A lot of gym work, strength and power work. So it'd be really interesting in the elite side of the game, what these first few games are like. I know the Bundesliga's come back. I haven't particularly paid too much attention. I see a couple of highlights. I don't know what type of pace it's been at, but I think any of you guys out there looking after the players coming back now in the UK, I think those who manage the injury list the best will probably be the more successful. I know a lot of kind of non-league and below the seasons are over, but if you're kind of working in some of the professional leagues now, it'd be really interesting how the injury list occurs, because there is just no way of getting around a huge spike in training. Pre-season's normally 6 weeks, and you can spread game training minutes out across the squad. Now you're fighting relegation potentially or promotion and etc. There's money on the line. You want your best players playing, and if one or two of those drop out through injury, there's a bit of trouble. So it just goes to show, though, that, and I say this as the owner of an analytics platform, data should be a handrail and not a handcuff. Nothing should replace the skill of a sports therapist. Use that data and think there might be a theme or trend there, but use your skill and knowledge. Use that human element of looking at that player, whether it be he's saying that he's fatigued and 10 out of 10 and he's holding a conversation and laughing around the changing rooms, or the other way around. He looks absolutely shattered, but he's saying he's okay because he's scared of losing out of a squad, etc. And I think the skill the skill of the clinician. If you can get data that just helps the skill of the clinician, that's for me us doing our job. But yeah, even if you've just got sessional RPE to go with, use that, and then just use it subtly, and then just apply your skill, and you won't go wrong. And like I say that as someone who loves analytics and visualizations, but never ever will we see, or I bloody hope not anyway, analytics be the sole decision maker. I think that would be a very sad day.
I think there's the element there that you touched upon, is the sort of the art of science and its application, and very much the experienced clinician being able to judge a player based upon analytical data, but also on the player that's standing in front of them or potentially running in front of them, and how we can actually assess that player visually as well. So I think you've sort of hit some nails on the head, and it's nice to hear someone who owns the analysis side of things to actually say that we do still need a sports therapist to be involved.
100%. Yeah, I think it would never ever get to that point ever. So I think we'll always need the skill of sports therapists, and actually it's a reverse, because the skill of the sports therapist and the knowledge of a sports therapist advances the analytics, evidence base, and the science base, and what analytics will always change, hopefully in accordance to what the sports therapists, sports scientists are doing, and what trends they're finding is really important analytics. So yeah, it's very much playing second fiddle to the sports therapist.
That's great, thank you very much. And I think that even if you work in clinical practice, there are things which you can sort of take from our conversation that you can start to apply with the patients who you see within your own clinical practice, and how you actually continue to monitor them. Maybe it might just be on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, in order to ensure that you are meeting the targets of their return to sport as well. So Liam, if anyone wanted to find out more about you or your business, where could they go?
If you could give me an email, liam@trainmyathlete.com. I'm quite active on LinkedIn as well, so reach out to me, Liam Hayes, on LinkedIn. And it'd be great to hear from anyone who's interested, both just on the analytics side generally, or wants to see a little bit about TrainMyAthlete.
Liam, thank you for coming on the podcast. I'll make sure that all the contact details are within the show notes. I'm sure we'll get you into the sports therapy community platform to speak to our members and answer some of their questions as well. So thank you very much for your time.